you, Chair. I've got some questions in relation to cash mandate and access to banking. Were all of the major banks consulted on the proposed cash mandate legislation?
We have consulted very broadly on the cash mandate. We have done a number of consultations.
I'm quite deaf. If you wouldn't mind just talking up a little, thank you.
Sorry, I'm having flashbacks. I think we had the same conversation last time, so am I. We consulted very broadly on the cash mandate. We consulted with consumers in a range of towns and cities across the country: Mildura, Darwin, Adelaide, Townsville. We also consulted with industry, so we consulted with the banks, we consulted with major retailers, we consulted very broadly, both on the policy settings, but also more recently on the exposure draft.
Okay. And did you receive submissions from all the banks?
We received a lot of submissions. I think on the cash acceptance mandate we received over 3,500 individual submissions. We also had 50 organisational submissions. I believe one was from the Australian Banking Association.
Yep. How many were published of the submissions?
So we haven't published the 3,500 individual submissions, just given the volume of that. I believe the organisational submissions have been published.
Okay. So in the exposure draft, there's a provision for the ACCC to provide an exemption to a business in exceptional circumstances where the costs associated with complying with the mandate would be too high. How will exceptional circumstances be defined?
So we've given that the exposure draft gives that discretion to the ACCC, so it can nuance based on the particular circumstance. But what we had in mind in that was natural hazard events. So there's a major flood and you can't, all the roads are closed and you can't actually get cash in. That would be something to take into account.
Is there an actual definition, or is it just case by case?
It will be case by case. In some cases, for instance, when we've had those natural hazard events, we've had to helicopter ATMs in. So you have to look at the actual event to see what's appropriate.
Yep. So if the location in which a supermarket or a fuel outlet is situated does not have a bank branch or reliable financial institution to obtain cash floats or deposit business takings, will this be considered an exceptional circumstance?
It could be. However, there is another piece of work that the Council of Financial Regulators has been undertaking around a cash regulatory framework, and a big underlying driver for that piece of work is to ensure affordable access to cash around Australia. So the two need to fit together.
Okay. So an example is in Queenstown in Tasmania. The local petrol station began refusing to take cash payment about 2 years ago. The town recently lost its last bank and the post office has been unable to keep up with the demand for cash, frequently having to put out calls on social media begging for change. The town running out of cash made national news a couple of weeks ago. Would a major brand service station or supermarket in town experiencing issues such as this be granted an exemption from the legislation under exceptional circumstances?
Again, that would be something for the regulator to consider. However, the cash regulatory framework that the Council of Financial Regulators has been working on is looking around how to ensure there is affordable access to cash, and some of the features that have been consulted on are service level standards for regional Australia.
Okay. If there's no mandate for banks to provide cash services out of the regions, how could the cash mandate be effective for regional communities?
So we have been working very actively with the banks in relation to regional banking services and how to shore them up. So there was obviously the announcements in February around the moratorium and the extension of Bank at Post. But we've also been actively working with banks around how they will lean back into regional banking services. An example I would highlight is Westpac's announcement last week around trialling community banking hubs with local council in partnership, and looking at graduate programs in the region. So there's a range of activities that we've been working with the banks around how they will lean back in and shore up regional banking services.
Okay. I'm not sure if you remember the last time I was here, I asked if the Treasury had provided government with advice in relation to the RRAT report that recommended an expert panel be commissioned in relation to establishing a government bank. I was told that the summary had been provided to government on recommendations of that report. Are you able to make available the summary or any further advice since then?
I can take on notice if we can make available the summary. We haven't provided any further advice in relation to setting up such a body.
Okay. Has there been any discussion around securing a regional bank closure moratorium, in particular from Bendigo Bank?
So the moratorium that's currently in place, and I know one of the majors has actually extended theirs out to 2030 now, has been focused on the major banks, mainly because the major banks have been the main drivers of regional bank closures. I note that Bendigo has closed a number of branches and agencies. The agencies actually predated the Bank at Post arrangements. They've been in Bank at Post for a long time. A number of the branches they've closed have other branches within a 5 kilometre radius. So conscious that for them it's been, in some cases, it's been consolidation. Also conscious that Bendigo has the third largest branch network in the country. One of the things that became very clear when we did the review of the small and medium banks, the Council of Financial Regulators did, was around the importance of small and medium banks in terms of competition in banking. And so one of the things that we're conscious of is not introducing new barriers to competition for small and medium banks, which is why the moratorium is very focused on the major banks.
When was the last time a small or medium bank opened in Australia?
APRA can give you that data. They're here later today. I know that APRA have, I think it's roughly 50 banks. They're considered very small in Australia, but they'd give you the data in terms of when they've approved a new licence.
And is the Treasury aware of the growing trend in the banking sector towards cashless sites that focus on lending referrals and advice rather than providing traditional banking services?
So we are aware and have been talking to the banks around different trends. Some of the cashless sites are not strictly cashless. It's just a definitional thing where, say, the APRA points of presence, to be considered not cashless, you actually have to have a teller, cash over the counter, where in many of these locations, they actually have a smart ATM, someone concierge to assist. So there is cash still being provided. So we're just conscious of the stories within the data. Likewise, some of the cashless sites are actually focused on small and medium banks and small and medium businesses and their customer needs. So we are talking to them about the access to cash, but we also recognise different customers have different needs, and so they have to adjust their business models for a retail customer versus a business customer who's looking at loans, for instance.
Okay. Given the government is going to introduce mandates around the use of cash, should it not also require banks to provide cash services to the regions?
We are actively working with the banks in relation to the cash access framework and the role that they play in relation to the provision of cash around the country.
You're at 10 minutes.
One more. Yep. given our cash states on it that is legal tender throughout Australia, and up until now businesses didn't have to accept cash, but come the 1st of January some businesses will and some won't. Do you think it might be confusing to some people around the rules?
So this is why we went out and consulted, and the original consultation looked at having the cash mandate around essential goods and services. There was no consensus what that meant, and it also, because there needs to be appropriate exemptions for small businesses, that was confusing. So the approach that the government now is taking is around groceries and fuel, because they were the key things that came out that everyday Australians consider everyday needs, and there are 1.4 million Australians that use cash for 80% of their daily needs, and they got kind of all coalesces around groceries and fuel. These are also industries where there are existing codes, so there's all the existing frameworks to implement it in a way that provides certainty.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
We will now